The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hi, welcome to a discussion with Betty Friedan. I'm Susan Goldberg, Director of the Minneapolis Public Library, and I'm here today to talk with Betty about her new book, The Fountain of Age. Welcome. Glad that you're with us today.
Good to be here again.
I have to tell you that I read The Feminine Mystique on a bus coming home from college for some vacation, and it was an amazing revelation to me. It really did change my life. And when I read your book, when it came out recently, I had a similar feeling. And I was really struck by just the first sentence when you say here, when my friends threw a surprise party for me on my 60th birthday, I could have killed them all. And that was the emphasis to do this book. Tell us about it.
No, I wasn't, I thought it was very hostile of them. I had every bit as much of denial. I didn't set out to write a book on age. Never. Age, yuck, who needs it? It had nothing to do with me. After all, I'm a flaming revolutionary, the feminine mystique and so on. But, so that's not why I started to write the book. I just noticed something different happening again with women, and it didn't fit. That's when my mental Geiger counter doesn't fit the book. Because after I wrote The Feminine Mystique, and this was quite a while ago, after I wrote The Feminine Mystique, my publisher then said, well, you said no to something, what's the yes? So I said no to women defined only as housewives, only as mothers, only as sex objects, not as a person, defining themselves by their own actions in society. And breaking through that obsolete image, did help, I guess, a lot of women change their lives. So they said, look for new patterns, okay? So if I came here to do a lecture, for instance, came to Minneapolis, and I did, I'd say, get me together women in your town, I'd say to the university, that are combining marriage, motherhood, and some pursuit beyond the home. Now, there weren't many women like that then. This is, after all, over 25 years ago. And the ones that they were older than I, because my generation was still home bringing up the baby boomers. And the next generation didn't even have career ambitions. They were giving up their education in the middle of college to put their husbands through. These older women, there weren't enough of them to be patterns, but they looked very alive, very vital, in many ways more than the younger suburban housewives I'd been interviewing for The Feminine Mystique with the problem that has no name. And their eyes, their skin. And when I asked them about the menopause, one after another said, I never had menopause, I can't help you. No. Well, I just didn't happen to have menopause. And these are women in their 50s. I thought, what am I finding? Biological freaks? And it turned out, of course, I asked more questions. They had menopause. They weren't having babies. They weren't having menstrual periods. But they thought they didn't have menopause because it was no big deal. It was not, they didn't take to their beds with depression. They didn't get hospitalized for involutional melancholia, as many women used to with menopause. And it wasn't the end of their lives as women, or their sexuality as women, as, the common belief was. Well, my Geiger counter clicks like it did with The Feminine Mystique when something doesn't fit what everybody else thinks is true. But I didn't do anything about this at the time because I got all involved in helping to start the women's movement for equality, which we needed to have real new patterns beyond The Feminine Mystique. And somewhere in those hectic years when we were changing our lives as women and the possibilities of life for women, I didn't have the menopause myself. I thought maybe I had a hot flash once, I think. In August 26, 1970, I called Women's Strike for Equality, 50th anniversary of the vote. And our strike headquarters was hot on a loft on Lower Fifth Avenue in New York, and no air conditioning, and I had to keep the feminists from now together, the radical students that I'd gotten in, and church ladies and so on. And I do remember one day the sweat kept pouring down me, and I used a whole pack of brown paper towels, and I couldn't get it wiped off. And I thought, much later with this new brouhaha over menopause, But do you suppose that I was having a hot flash that day? But anyway, what really got me going, and again, I wasn't interested in age, you understand. I mean, it had nothing to do with me. Robert Butler, Dr. Robert Butler, who was head of the National Institute on Age, he asked me to come see him in Washington. He said, I want to get you interested in age because the theory and the policies have all been done by men, about men, and yet most of the people in age happen to be women. Now, that really had begun to, sort of concern me. American women were living so much longer than men. And, you know, my feminism was never one of women against men anyway. But I thought, you know, we had to break through the obsolete sex roles, masculine mystique as well as feminine mystique that kept us both from being all we could be. And, you know, American women now have a life expectancy of 80, men only 72. The turn of the century, it was the same. So I told Butler about the ladies that didn't have menopause, and I said, if changing the way we think about ourselves and the way we move in society as women could have such an effect on the aging process that those women didn't even think they had menopause, what about men? What changes in the way men think about themselves might enable them to live longer? So he said our research doesn't deal with questions like that. So I decided that I would do a book on these changing sex roles of the aging process. But I wasn't interested in age. I couldn't figure out. I didn't want to think about it. I was absolutely every bit as much as denial as the rest of the society. And even when I started doing the research, I got grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Ford Foundation, went up to Harvard on a fellowship, and I taught my book, The Second Stage, in a seminar, but otherwise I could use the university for my own research. So I dug into the research. And it was so depressing. It was all about senility, Alzheimer's, nursing homes, and ethical questions, which was, when do we turn off the machine? And I was so dreary. What was I doing this for? And then gradually, it dawned on me that there was a mystique of age every bit as pernicious, perverted, distorted, obsolete as the feminine mystique. And it kept us all from even wanting to think about age or seeing its new realities, because it defined age solely as a kind of programmed deterioration from youth to terminal decline, terminal senility. And it wasn't true. I just discovered to my surprise, because I held my nose and made myself dig into the research, that only 5% of Americans over 65 have any kind of senility. Only 5% are in nursing homes at any one time. There is no program deterioration from youth. And that assumption was based on studies many decades ago done on old men in old people's homes, which were the word then for nursing homes. And those men, no families, removed from society, only custodial care, their testes and their brains did shrink from disuse. But the more recent research I discovered, and I kind of distill it in my book, The Fountain of Age, which is in paperback now. So, there, right, I got to show the commercial. Anyway, it shows that for most people, if you are aging in the community, if you don't let yourself be hyped into a nursing home or a sort of geriatric playpen built around a nursing home in the middle of the desert with a wall around it, bus in to the community one day a month or something like that. So keep out of sight so other people won't be reminded they're getting older. Anyway, if you stay in the community, women and men in age today, as they age, they do not suffer significant deterioration until well into their 80s. That figure goes up every year, or at all, or otherwise just before death. And it isn't directly age, it's the months before death, the decline, the deterioration. And furthermore, it's not programmed, because more than any other period of life, it's different from individual to individual, and it seems to depend on what you do, what you don't do, or what society lets you do or not do. And we have to get rid of this youth obsession, of these blinders, that the panic, the denial, that we can solve anything to hold on to youth. to look at this new third of life that people have today to look forward to after 50, after menopause. People can look forward to a whole new third of life, women more than that. And we are the first people in the history of the world that, on the whole, could do that, you know? I mean, that, and basically look forward to 25, 30 more years of healthy life. And we have to see this new period of life in its own terms. I mean, do you need to love the way you loved when you were 30 or not love at all? Do you need to work the way you worked when you were 30 or not work at all?
Let me ask you this, because one of the things that struck me when I read the book, and you did 10 years of research, hundreds and hundreds of interviews, spent a lot of time digging into what had been done. What was very apparent that what had been done in the whole area of gerontology was very clinical, was based on Alzheimer and senility and age as infirmity.
Yes.
And that there was nothing being done or studied on the whole area of age as a natural process. Has that changed since you began the book?
It is changing, or even more, that age as continued development and continued growth. Again, it's not programmed, but new research indicates not only that the deterioration is not nearly as pervasive as you guess from the image, and that it may not happen at all if you're lucky enough to die in the midst of life, and if it does happen, it's just before death, but that there can be continued growth and development. And only sometimes if you just use the yardstick of youth, you don't even measure it. You have to, even to see these things, you have to get rid of that obsession with youth as the peak. Because, I mean, you could have your face up to 5 times. Is it going to make you look younger? No, it's going to make you look like a mummy. I mean, dehumanize all the lines of experience that made you
tight but no expression.
Right, right. And so, that it keeps you from, I'll tell you, I did find what I call the gerontological underground. I mean, that people that were interested in age as continued, people continue to grow and develop, and to find out the dimensions of that, and to try to identify what I call the strengths that have no name, because your brain, wonderful experiments Marion Diamond at Berkeley did on rats that show that rats, the equivalent of 90-year-old human beings, if they are, if they're in an isolated cage, their brains, deteriorate, decay. But even rats, the equivalent of 90-year-old human beings, if they are put in a cage with lots of other rats and lots of things to do, mazes and puzzles and little wooden toys and things, that their new synapses grow in their brain. Their new synapses grow in their brain. And now this gerontological underground, they are, some of them actually are, major respected gerontologists, but the general image of the stake maybe that the field of gerontology has in keeping the perceptive older people as infirmity and then selling them nursing homes or retirement communities or things to keep them out of society. It's like there's 2 different currents going on.
Well, how did that establishment feel about you, Betty Friedan, famous radical revolutionary, looking at what they were doing?
I don't know. Some of the really good ones welcome me and welcome my book, and I think it will be used to teach courses, or I hope so, at least now that it's out in paperback, nice yellow cover, but or the units in psychology or sociology that deal with age. We've got to start thinking about it in new ways, but some are threatened. Some are threatened. Some of the, for instance, the Minnesota Gerontological Society had me come to give its endowed lecture. American Association for Aging Research that wants to extend life and vital life gave me a big medal. But the Gerontological Society of America, I think they tremble when I come around. So, the aging establishment maybe a bit threatened, although the best of them certainly, I think, welcome my book. But I do think that it is changing. My book and the others that will come on will change the way women and men, because my book is as much about men as women, my new book, that it will change the way women and men think about themselves growing older, and it will change the way our society looks at age. Now, after I began to find out that there was this dreary, dread image of age wasn't really true, I tell you, when the big breakthrough happened for me, that's why I couldn't answer that question you asked me first personally, because that's not the way I started the book. But all those first couple of years, it was like driving with the emergency brake on. Then I interviewed a woman in Palm Springs, California, and she had flaming red hair, but she was clearly older than I, because I have a little brown lip. And she had also very crepey legs under a mini tennis skirt. My legs are still quite good. And so she said to me, "Oh, how nice. I hear you're doing a book for those poor old people." And I heard myself saying, "I'm not writing a book about them. I'm writing a book about us." "Oh, not me," she said. "I'm never going to get old. Not me. Us. It's ourselves growing older." And there was some absolute refusal to think about it, terror to think about that. Well, what do I think about that? I decided to look at the image of age that the mass media give us, because that was the big clue for me for the feminine mystique. So I took magazines for 1 month, women's magazines, men's magazines, general news magazines. What was the image of people over 60? I was going to analyze image in ads, image in illustrations, photograph. I couldn't find enough to analyze. There were a few older men in the news magazines, rich, powerful men. One picture of a man with in an ad, distinguished white sideburns, draping a mink coat over the nude shoulders of a 20-year-old bimbo. But the ads even selling women anti-age do, Forever Youth gel, 17-year-old model with one line painted on her face. There wasn't a picture, not one picture in some magazines, of anyone that wasn't young, doing anything that any American would really like to do. Flirting, loving, playing tennis, dancing, hanging out, arguing, laughing, eating, anything. It was like we couldn't look on the face of age, and yet more and more talk in the newspapers about the problem of age, the problem of these growing millions of people refusing to die after 60, the greedy geezers refusing to die after 70, even after 80, the fastest growing group in the whole population. And what are we going to do with this burden of this sick, smelly, senile, unproductive older people on young society, the problem of age? And it denies the new and vital possibility.
Now, let me ask you this. Do you think that's going to change now, since the huge bulge of the population, the baby boomers are the aging baby boomers? Are we all who are outside the baby boomer generation or in it going to continue to accept wrinkle cream on a 17-year-old, an ad selling a car by a 20-year-old? Is it going to change the way the media has to deal with it?
I think it has to, because it's the schizophrenic sort of denial of reality, is ultimately just sheer dollars, is going to make it change maybe. I mean, tell you, the youth obsession reached peak with, I don't know, you look pretty young, but your generation was, you can't trust anyone over 30.
That's right.
And 40, your 40th birthday, black balloons, and 50, unthinkable. And that baby boom generation, the big bulge in the population, the youth market that everybody wanted, 18 to 39. You've got an interesting character in a television series over 40. Get rid of her, whatever. You're all heading for your 50th birthday, And what I was amazed, this is out in paperback just now, but in a blue cover. It was in hardcover. So this last year, I'd go into a bookstore, and what I was interested in is that a lot of the people that were buying the book were youngish. You know, they were in their 30s maybe. They'd say, oh, autograph this for my mother, for Molly. And they'd say, oh, this other one, I could have 2 books. Oh, it's just safe for Mark. You know, like that was for himself. And so he said, then I began to hear this like, oh, your book has just come in time for me. I've just had my 35th birthday. Or, you know, oh, it's such a relief. It's such a comfort to, I mean, you know, I'm 33, to realize that I could actually look forward to the whole rest of my life. I mean, it was supposed to be over at youth, and youth isn't is over. Youth is over. Vitality isn't over. Life isn't over. But you have to stop trying to hold so desperately onto youth. Now, the marketers and the advertisers is in a certain sense behind the evolving reality of the American people. I mean, you know,
so the reality comes first, and then advertising follows?
Well, I don't know. The people at this moment, each one thinking he or she is alone, is discovering with surprise that it's not. I mean, that there are even good changes that happen.
Well, that's like the women's movement.
Yeah.
Each of the women who thought that she was alone,
right,
found
and that's
that
what books
she
like
wasn't.
mine help to do. That, you know, the feminine mystique, women realized that there was nothing. They weren't crazy. That they were suffering a common condition, you know, with other women, the problem that had no name. Now in the Fountain of Age, you know, what I think it's the discovery is less, you know, that more like almost positive, you know, that sort of a relief almost to be liberated from this dreary dread and denial of age, or the liberated from the obsession with youth. You know, you could say, oh, I may be 70, but inside I'm 17. Oh, you're not? Haven't you learned anything yet? You know, I mean, like you're vital, you're alive, but you don't have to pretend you're 17. So if you keep holding on to that youth thing, you get angry. You just get more and more mad, really. You're mad at people that are your age or older because they remind you you're not young. You get mad at young people because they remind you you're not young. Get mad at yourself for not being young. And you're blinded from seeing the new possibilities of this new period of life. You know what happens, the research shows, my interviews show that I deal with in the Fountain of Age, and it's not the Fountain of Youth, because once you get past the dread and the denial and the desperate clinging, you know, to the youth thing, you become more and more authentically yourself. You become more comfortable with who you really are. You become a truth teller, which is not always so comfortable for those around you. And you become liberated from some of the obsessions of your youth. You don't have to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, superwoman, superman. You know, you stop obsessing about your little breasts or your fat thighs or your big nose or your little prick or all the things that people obsess about, and you are yourself. And then there's a liberation there. And then you ask new questions like, do I have to love the way I loved when I was 30 or not love at all? Then you're open to new ways.
So one of the themes of the book is that aging is opportunity, and that you have to grasp the opportunity.
Possibility.
And possibility.
Right. And evolution, you know, further evolution of yourself and all these things that define you as human, you know. And, you know, what I call the last section of my book, The Fountain of Age, is freedom to risk, the freedom to risk age's adventure even, and to try to put a name to some of these strengths that have no name, that, whereas when I was interviewing the young suburban housewives, I talked about problems that have no name. The women and the new men moving into a new way into age have strengths that have no name because they aren't visible on the youth yardstick, you know, and women especially the women that have been through all the changes of the last 20, 30 years, they seem to have, at this moment, more of those strengths. Because the two important things for a really vital age, well, some are things are simple, like smoking is going to shorten your life. But the most important things are complex. Purposes and projects that give complex structure to your days and use your human abilities and keep you part of society, and bonds of intimacy. And so they give you some clue as to maybe why women are living longer than men. I mean, women have had such experience in responding to change and having to reinvent their purposes and projects, especially the women who've come of age in the last 25, 30 years of such change for women. And women have been responsible for the bonds of intimacy, the children, can this marriage be saved, the aged parent. That if a woman's husband dies, a man's wife dies, he's more likely to die in the next 2 years of any illness unless he remarries, or after he's survived 5 years alone. Evidently, he's learned the skills. A woman's husband dies, she may grieve, or she may not grieve, but she doesn't die.
I paid particular attention to that when I read that, and that struck me as something that people don't know about. And that also is an opportunity, I think, that people need to learn about and think about, both men and women, what that means when their long-term spouse
Well, I
passes
think
away.
that the men in the future, the young men today, may not die so much younger than their wives, because they are also taking more responsibility for the bonds of intimacy. They may not share 50% of the child rearing, but they're sure sharing a lot more of it, than the babies in the backpack than they did before. Furthermore, maybe they're breaking through that old definition of masculinity. If masculinity is based on knocking the other guy down, you've lost it by the time you're 60, maybe. If you've based your masculinity on a single score in that career competitive rat race, and you're out now, not only in your 60s, but your 50s or your 40s, or even standards of sexual performance that for men, Kinsey's study showed peak at 17. Maybe the new men are going to have more flexibility, which you have to stay in control of your life. That is the important thing.
Okay, now we're coming to the end of this interview, and I want to thank you for being here. You said that it's time, as you're aging, to be a truth teller. And I think that you, Betty Friedan, has been a truth teller in all your books and all your work. So I really appreciate the time you spent with us today. And I urge everyone to read the book. It's fascinating. The Fountain of Age by Betty Friedan. Thank you.
Thank you.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.